Hey everyone, it's been a few weeks since my last update. I've been deep in development, juggling game design with my full-time job and personal life. For a little background on myself, I studied computer science in school and I take a lot of pride in writing clean and maintainable code. During my free time, I've been reading Modern Software Engineering by Dave Farley and Clean Code by Robert Martin, which have inspired several refactors and even new systems. The first of which is a new projectile system. Projectiles are now built with components for targeting, movement, triggers, and effects, making it super easy to add new behavior without writing a new script every time. I actually drafted this system on paper first and started by implementing the core modules. Targeting is simple for now, just the player, but it's already useful. By centralizing the reference to the player object, I avoid unnecessary repetition. And if I ever change how I identify the player or add multiplayer, I'll know exactly where to make that change. Plus, this makes it easy to support other types of targeting, like enemies healing the lowest health ally or the last enemy that was hit. The movement component defines how a projectile moves through space. So far, I've got linear paths, arced lob tosses, curved homing, returning boomerangs, and even orbiting projectiles. Since each movement style is its own class, I can fine-tune their behavior through the inspector instead of hard-coding them. Triggers are the event modules. They control when and what effects are activated based on a certain condition. This system can be configured to pair specific triggers to effects, or to simply execute all of the effects for the projectile when triggered. Right now, there are two core trigger types, collisions and timers. Collisions can be customized to ignore the player or ground to enable combinations like these bouncing projectiles. Timer triggers execute their effects after a certain delay at a set interval, which can be useful for delayed or repetitive actions. Effects are where the magic happens. They define what the projectile does. This includes things like dealing damage, playing sound effects, spawning visual effects, and destroying itself. And because destruction is modular too, I can later replace it with an object pool for performance without touching the rest of the system. The result? Adding new projectiles is super fast now, and experimentation is wide open. I can make a linear projectile that bounces around the scene, orbiting projectiles that damage anything nearby, or homing projectiles that spawn off orbiters every second. The possibilities are kind of endless. So going forward, making new enemies really comes down to creative movement and cool visuals, not rebuilding the logic every time. In addition to the projectile system, I've made several improvements to bosses and their related systems. The most impactful change came from restructuring the inheritance hierarchy into decoupled, independent systems. Previously, bosses were just an extension of the base enemy class, which still needs the same refactoring that the bosses have received. The problem was not so much that bosses extended the enemy behavior, but more so that the enemy class itself had too many responsibilities. The enemy class previously managed health, a state machine, death, and spawning experience and gold. The new boss system is completely decoupled. An isolated health component class manages initializing and updating health along with death. Events are invoked during key moments like taking damage, healing, dying, and more. The class is generalizable to be used by anything that needs health, and separated from the effects by a listener and response system. There are listeners for both taking damage and dying, which subscribe to the events of the health system. These execute responses that can be modularly applied to game objects. Damage responses include adjusting a flash shader on the rendering material, a moment of hit stop, and a squash and stretch animation. Each of these responses are completely independent, and this system can be expanded to play sound effects or to handle knockback in the future. When a boss dies with a death listener attached, there are responses for playing a new roar sound effect, applying some screen shake, disabling components and child objects, instantiating the skull animation, spawning gold and experience, granting an ability slot, destroying itself after the boss bar animation is finished, and even triggering the game over state. Outside of the health and effects, I've also extracted the state machine into its own self-contained ecosystem of classes. The state machine itself is responsible for registering attached states to the machine, initializing the default state, managing transitions, and finding states by their type. Currently, there are only movement states and attacking states, but this system is flexible and expandable to support states outside of just enemies in combat. Each boss can use the new conditions classes to define the circumstances for changing states. Currently, there are just conditions for distance, but I could include relative positions such as the player being below the boss, maintaining line of sight, being below a certain health threshold, and more. The point is to make the creation of complex and intelligent bosses a simple and streamlined process. The bulk of the effort will still come from art and animation phases, more so than the mechanics. There are still many things that I'd like to improve as I continue to work on these systems, but the changes I've made have already proved to be immensely helpful. In my effort to add a boss to each of the biomes, I've recently been focused on the third biome, the cave. I had some concepts for attacks and general inspiration, but things changed throughout the design process. After much iteration, I settled on this design for the crystal golem, a bulky, lumbering rock monster with crystals growing out of its back that provide its source of life. This boss builds on the player's knowledge of the laser attack from the droid enemies that roam the caves. For its first attack, its main crystal dislodges from its back and levitates above its disabled body before firing off a barrage of lasers at the player. While the crystal is out of the golem's body, the hurt box for the boss is relocated to the crystal as opposed to the golem's body. This ties into the lore of the crystal being the boss's source of life, and forces the player to play dangerously if they want to deal damage during this phase. For the second attack, the boss swipes across the floor, throwing a boulder of rocky debris at the player. This boulder will bounce around for a few seconds before destroying on its own or when colliding with the player. The sound and particles when it breaks are some of my favorite effects in the game so far. Interestingly, I forgot to make the boulders bounce off of semi-solid platforms, and this led me to question whether all projectiles should be able to move through these platforms. This decision would definitely change the way the player uses semi-solids in combat, as they're currently a safe, one-way shield for attacking up through, but I'm interested to hear your thoughts as well. Lastly, the golem was too stationary with its other attacks, so I added a third state for charging at the player. The golem raises its spiky arm and plows through whatever lies ahead. This helps keep the fight dynamic and prevents the player from standing in the same spot for too long. In addition to the major changes that I've talked about so far, I've made a lot of other changes as well to help strengthen the world building and center the player in an immersive experience. The first of these changes includes new environment particles, which vary depending on the given biome and suits their unique settings. I think these simple effects really add to the visual appeal of the game and help better set the setting. For several years, levels used to be much larger than they've been recently, and these shrunken levels have caused several problems when it comes to generation. Namely, objects that the player could interact with could generate too close to each other, preventing them from even being interacted with at all. Additionally, spikes were able to cover the entirety of a platform, which made it feel unfair when there was a boss or gold sitting on that platform, and it felt forced that you had to take damage in order to get down there. Now, objects properly maintain a minimum spacing between each other, and spikes no longer cover the entirety of a platform, guaranteeing that there's always a way to land safely. Some other small changes include the player always facing the direction that they attack, hit particles when attacking bosses, and experience having an initial velocity away from its spawn point. These subtle changes could easily go unnoticed, but the combination of these small effects leads to a richer game feel. The next major milestone is to develop and release a free demo for everyone to be able to play. The goal of the demo is to provide a vertical slice of the entire gameplay loop and allow people to try the game without having any investment. Before I'm confident in sharing a demo, I want to make several changes. Obviously, I'd like to fix all the bugs that I'm aware of to make sure that everyone can enjoy a smooth and fair experience. Additionally, I'd like to continue on this trend of small visual and audio improvements to make the game more polished and fun. Lastly, I want to replace the separate tutorial with a built-in system of hints and guides that help direct new players to know their objective. With all of these goals met, I would be able to confidently release a demo that I would be proud of. If you're looking forward to the game's development, give it a wishlist on Steam, subscribe here on YouTube, and join the Discord to get more active in the community. It's been a blast getting to share my creative process with you all, and hear your input on tricky decisions. If you've made it this far in the video, I sincerely thank you for your time and support. I hope you have a great day.